제 최단 초기 전원은 장주바도 단년 제소지 나외제 예외선언제 돌아변제 상제 조보 상제 최단 초기 전원은 장주바는 단년 제소 나외제 예외선언제 돌아변 상제 조보 조상제 제당 조제 정랑라 야조제 다괴제 예제 선언지 돌아변제 상제 주보쇼 라단라메메다명지 용보다 제진로서 제제로서 저번에 선제서 바라도 시제되어 주로 제다 주제다 매진 되는 일이 제가 제전들은 제서부터 제가 전제 쳐받아라 저도 대적고 내가 왜냐 자세자 조사연면데 안베단이라와도라 되었으면 나무 라이가 달로다는 영가 두분다는 메가는 더 군제라는 체에서 탐제게도 다그 제대도 관계 떠나 된주당 운명도 된주보 순서 순범에 봐 상제대 라자자로서 오야 다더니 가서래 진주기네 진주라 그래서 다그 자주 갈라시 뒤로반이 메차데 기타 대신 시에와니 담바담베 담바송베 댄디송 세오송아체 어디 나들이 어디 가르친 거래 세는 다그 자주 갈라시 뒤로반이 마셔 뒤로반이 메차데 기타 대신 시에와니 담바송베 댄디송 시리가나 아니 산제주 공방 생각인데 가르치려래 sana 안본 넘보 아니 가르쳐서나 선은 자체 못 사봐 저니가 선은 자체로 진짜 신도 봐봐 아니 자세지 제발라 아니 가외 파도 로광게 로번유와기 아니 안본도 못했다 그 두바 차와지래 다다도 보게 아니 자주 두바지 아니 바 두바 누구 말해 냠바기 아니 길루미자 다게 자주 칼라시 길루바지 메네 길루바네 메샤데스 아니 세사 대신 시에와네 담바시베 댄디송 서 대신 시에와게 담바 가르송 말에서나 아니 라나도시 시위도당 꾸저진 그 도이나나 가르송 말에서나 오다 대다 자주스베 저번에 안 담보다 샤란다 부만다 오 대다기야 아니 가서래 아나메 배 자주도 세미테나 토벌 교와이나 아니 가서래 미den지 유수 제와게 아니 토벌 교와 매치고에 송아나시 체니 어디송거래 어디신 담바 대다시 담바 소베 댄디 수루스 티시시바게 담바 송거래 마도 지바송바게 굉장히 와 말레스 야마송바 인상 다 가르송바래 에서나 저 가서래 근데 어디 가서 숨바 나신 전에 된데기 하나만 봐 양다 뭐 저거 자주도 sem제나 아니 나는 가서래 장제주 공부 터봐 주그래서 다 뒤오더라 장부샤랑 부와당 디신심보 강조봐 대장전배 또 되나 장주 토가라메 토 단조 토가라나베 나다 미르기 미제네서 나다고 아니 리 단조게 대해서 된대지 제 아니 랑도지 판단 내봐 랑도지 내셔와 그 셔라다데 나다 미르기 메셔네 판단 내방 하셔나 티 장주 치미도지 장주 치미도지 아니 장주 타바 주그래 야
So, as it says in the introduction to the Bodhisattva's way of life, there are verses which say something to the effect of
가서 다그 장주 갈라시 일루반이 메시아체스 장주 첨보세 장주 산제그 성가서 안본 연보 원래 가서 초 사바 참외순도 까와 참외순도 봐도 아니 자사지 잡아 차가 라반 니겐기 아니 장주 선바 대다 그 두바 차와레스 아니 나다바 그 아니 두바 니바 마레 세네 오늘 길루 치주가 마레 다게 장주 칼라세 길루 반에 메샤세
So there's verses in the introduction to the Bodhisattva's way of life, or Bodhisattva's conduct, that say, at the beginning of it says, one should not be discouraged thinking, how can someone like myself achieve awakening, the full awakening of Buddhahood? Because, and it's easy to get discouraged about this because one thinks, one examines how the Buddha actually did it, and it took 3 great eons of time, and he had to engage in all of the difficult kinds of conduct of a bodhisattva, the hardships and so forth that are part of that path, which takes 3 countless eons. So it's easy to become discouraged, but the verse says one shouldn't be discouraged when contemplating the difficulties of practicing the way to full awakening, even if it takes 3 countless eons.
Oh yeah, that is here on it. Damba tender sung said, and it is Shivaki, Damba Sunga Ramado, any Zubasumaki, your Mares. Damba Sumba in the Tishi, Damba Kasum or Kasum, but Damba in by the Carrera, Jasa Chanju Java Lova. 내 가르에서나 아니 전부 다下站다 풍화다 다디마 라나도 시 가서 어디 섬년 그래서 주와 망보지마 참매니 대다 개장 아니 라나메 배 창주도 섬제나 아니 창주 터봐주고 그래서 다디 호들라 된다 진주기 전부下站 풍화당 티시심보 강주와 대장 전배 또제나 창주 토갈라메 톱세들이 장부당, 자장당, 공화당, 대다라 소와게 아니 전배 또 제나 장주에 토관하나 매바 토브세를做的 대다고 줄에 상예의日月呗 是吧 상예의日月呗 상예의 그 주롱요 그日月呗대 주과的
So then the reason we can use to avoid having that kind of discouragement is by thinking as follows, that which is taught by the Tathagata or the Buddha is true. Whatever is found within the teachings, Buddhas never lie. What they say is always true. And within the teachings then it's explained that if one produces bodhicitta, the aspiration to achieve unexcelled true perfect awakening for the sake of all sentient beings, then if one produces that and then engages in the practice of the perfections as they're explained in the bodhisattva path, then eventually one can develop oneself such that one's able to do difficult kinds of practices, even such as like giving away your own body to others and those extremely advanced difficult practices. If one starts off in the beginning with easier practices, one can eventually develop oneself into that kind of state. So once one follows that kind of reasoning, that through the production of bodhicitta, the aspiration to become a Buddha, then one can eventually develop oneself to that kind of ability. Then one develops confidence in the ability to do that and overcomes the discouragement that one can fall prey to.
오야, 근데 일단 아니 전부다下站다 풍화라서 대다장 아니 상계지 배르지 차바인바 아니 상계와 주바 人间能够去到心，谁看是吧？人间能够去到心，现在可许那么许过那些钱呢？人不接上心了，俺那设计也没个，刚说的也没许把它，去上心了，要么没许把它，俺那个上心了，真没许把人章，能够真到插入当，去要么当插入当。 你看说人家那个，你这也当插入人把那些钱呢， 아니 다 텐더위 심전 대다그 아니 장부다下장서 풍화서说 대다그 유지라야 아니 심지 친이 요데 아니 심지라실라 팀에레바 마슈바 팀에레바 마슈바 인자 심지 치마다 차롱 아니 심지라시 여사와 인장 아니 산제주고 아니 토바주암 아니 토브드로마
Now, the reason we can establish that is because the mind, our minds, no matter what sort of samsaric state they're in, possess the basic nature of being luminous and free from the defilements that temporarily or adventitiously affect them. So whatever kind of condition one's in samsara, the mind has its basic character such that it can be undergo transformation. So this basic Buddha nature, the quality of the mind, which is that it's by its basic nature is free from the adventitious or temporary defilements that that occur within it when one's in a samsaric state. The fact that those defilements are not of the very nature of the mind, they're something which is temporary, produced by specific causes and conditions, and adventitious, not of the very nature of the mind, then that establishes that the mind is something that is suitable to be purified of these temporary defilements, and that basic character or nature of the mind is what is the kind of nature or Buddha nature, the sort of lineage of being a Buddha, that is something that is suitable to undergo transformation, purification to the state of complete Buddhahood, where one achieves even the embodiments of the Buddha, the Dharmakaya and so forth. So this is explained in for example, the sutras that explain the Buddha nature, and as well as the treatise that explains that. And in these sutras and so forth, it's explained that the Buddha nature is like a jewel, or it's like water, or like gold, or like a golden statue of the Buddha and so forth. All of these examples are given to show that the basic character or nature of the mind has that luminous or intrinsic purity or ability to become free from the adventitious or temporary defilements. And therefore, like a jewel could be temporarily sunk into a pit of filth, but the being surrounded by that filth or immersed in it doesn't affect the basic clarity and the luminosity of that jewel when it's removed from the temporary condition, accidental condition of being in the pit of filth. Then the basic, the natural purity of the jewel is still there. Same thing with gold. It can be temporarily tarnished. Some kind of smut or something can get on the gold, but that doesn't enter into the gold itself. It's just on the surface and can be removed. Same thing, same analogy there. Or like a golden Buddha statue that's sunk into filth. The same kind of analogy. Or honey, which is surrounded by a bunch of angry bees. That honey itself is not, the nature of the honey isn't the nature of the bees. The bees can be removed from that, and then but the state of that purity and clarity of the honey is still there constantly. So that all of these analogies are given to describe Buddha nature, the basic luminous quality of the mind, which is its character of being suitable to become separated from the adventitious temporary defilements.
Oh yeah, that is it. 他就说这个参的进入这的了，大大人给没结呗，看到那帮我写呗，可以抢去记没都是一个了。他打不，安尼他告诉，他说参与没有点开发前头，安尼朗多今年写呗，突然点把现在大大人给没结呗，看到我那帮我写呗是，安尼看把他那帮，安尼朗多今年写呗。 아니 랑도지 내세베세 판단원방 허세베 아니 랑게 랑도지 내세체 랑도지 내라 주데 랑도지라 냠수 시다르 때만 나세 냠수 랑네 랑발라 때네 아니 르마 신도 아니 람지 티버 가서래 티버숨제 람라 로장데 아니 자주 주바제지 예나 산제지 자주 관방 주바제지나 자주 관방 아니 지메도지 아니 토바 주그래 송거야 말해.
Now, the remainder of those verses in the introduction to the Bodhisattva's conduct says that someone like myself, so first Shantideva said, I shouldn't be discouraged, and then the further reason for that is that the Buddha never says anything false, and within the sutras it's explained how mind is naturally pure, or can be purified of the adventitious defilements. But then finally, the basic reasoning is that at the moment I've been born into a condition where I have a human body and mind, and this human body and mind is a basis for the development of the path. That is, I'm endowed with this Buddha nature, have a human body and mind, and so and also I have the intelligence to be able to distinguish between things that are beneficial to me and things that harm me. Even on the basic worldly level, I understand what is useful and what is not useful, and so one can apply that to the specific teachings of the path, understanding what is to be gotten rid of, things that we ought to avoid, and what is to be taken up, things that we ought to put into practice. We have that capacity right now. So being born as humans with this sort of foundation of being able to practice the path, then there's no essential reason why we can't gradually learn and then put into practice the various elements of the path according to our own capacities, and in stages enter into that process of development. So we're in this place where we can do that, and there's no reason to be discouraged about the difficulty of achieving Buddhahood.
Oh yeah, that we any Sanjay you come on top of Cheva, and the shoe and Nashi Chenny. Along the Gina Carres, and I know call you about the Dobby and by the Yamsulian coin. Now call you about the Dobby and by Yamsul and Ghana. I need this down the pair. Call you to about down the Parada, Namdi Nibugado. Anita, and he Castle, ever Sawa Shabai, but I demand you at Kasam Panjala, and you castle. Then you will call a Toma Yebe, Tajamami Betaji, Gaba down, and the Gajami Betaji Gabani Shagala. That call a Toma Yuba Tajamami Betaji. I say, call a Toma Yuba Tajamami Betaji Gabata, Gajami Betaji Gabas. That Hambola call and the Kasashua around Zota, then you want to give such a village Pumbote. That Pumbote, and the Toma you are a vessel at Tawan and Meba. City, Annie, Mamayanga to Nizan Jama Tabi Pumbote, Annie Castle, Jawangami Pumbo. Annie Javaliangam, Mayanga to Javaliangam, Kasachi Pumbotella. Then I remarked in the remarking of Kwana Kondo Pump, on the Sunday. I need to Tommy Talatani Meba. Tommy Tayana, I need such a Niliji Pumbot, Tommy Tayana, and Yana, Jumele Java Diana, Medibujula Java and Macheba. Namshi Toma della, Namshi Rudi, going, but that teach you what it. Namshi maybe Namshi Yelimi and Chi and Drew Sekala, Sheveri, Yeling Gudela, and Riva, Kasayaga Tesoma, and Deji Sabella, Deji Nugutiva Mato, and Shaba Mijeba, Neji Nugu, Jevala, Neji Sabon Goa in town. Oh, that is too much of Goa in town. What he is that Namshi Thomas Namshi La Tommy Tatan and Meba in that tissue everybody. Now I send you call Thomas Meba do the some young army start to give it maybe seriously. Reading are among the Mason watches start to give a maybe seriously. Can made Namshi member Namshi Gillian to Ruma, my seriously. 남시 멤버님 남시지 내년도 rumwa 많이 봐서 가나 랑그 내년에 랑그 제진 치마 제지 고와 인자 리트 봐주고 그래서 그봐 가디 오보 탐제 아니 나 가서래 가정오 탐제제 남시지 집이 내린지 너봐 너봐 남시 미사와다 때문에 스카지글라나 아니 오 탐제지 남시 집이 내린지 너봐 남시 미사와다 때문에 남시 미배 남시지 내린 민바 아니 주선바 되도서나 남시기 내냐면 그 아니 남시 고고 말에 주선바데 되도서나 야.
Now then, so we've gone in this part of the Pramanavarttika, the explanation of valid cognition or avenues of valid cognition, gone through the beginning sections and then into the Four Noble Truths, and have arrived at the truth of suffering. So then there's different demonstrations of the different aspects of suffering within the truth of suffering, the different components of that, and we've arrived at the point where it's describing how samsara necessarily has a beginning, and begins by the beginning of that is refuting the idea that samsara has a beginning. That there's a first point in samsara, and so this discussion begins on page 368, where the basic thesis is presented that samsara also can be proven to be beginningless by other reasons, because it is not reasonable that sentient beings are newly born without previous lives. So what this is saying then is that samsara, that any particular individual life starts at birth, but we can establish that there was a birth life prior to that, because in order for a particular life to arise, it has to have all of the necessary conditions present for that life to occur. And we can establish that the cause of that new life isn't physical, merely reducible to physical things. That is, it couldn't be non-mental, because the non-mental is not suitable to be the substantial cause of that which is mental. That is, particularly with respect to consciousness here, consciousness doesn't arise from having as its substantial or primary cause a physical thing. It necessarily arises from a prior instance of some mental kind of or state of consciousness. So that's the basic position here, and based upon that, then we're able to establish that through the chain of lifetimes going back, there's no first point in time at which consciousness arose or the mind arose, and then therefore that establishes that samsara is beginningless. But an opponent might come back and say that say that there's actually a kind of first point in samsara, that is a beginning of it. They could make the claim that because all entities possess an unclear mind that has the capacity to be the substantial cause generating mind, we accept that it is proven that it is already established that the non-mental is not the substantial cause of the mental. So this particular opponent has sort of granted that point, but they still don't agree with the position that is being articulated here.
Oh yeah, 다 들리 가서 그래. 오버 탐자라 남시 집이 아니 얘네 일반 남시 메시아 받아 담바 얘나 아니 둘에 대부 탐자 내용 오여도 시고래시. 오 탐자라 남시 집이 일반 메시아 와요나 아니 주의 내가 설어 둘에양 대부 탐자 내용 오도 여도시 왜도 시고래시. 오 대이나다 가서 그래. 장제 내신 수양 대답이 좋아 쳐봐 믿어 봤다. 양된 된다 되봐도 유를 되면 이봐 여봐 되봐도 아니 최고 자와다 자와 넘치리. 가르에서나 유 인도 되고 니봐 서지 니봐 메사 서지나 아니 먼저 주 사소지 있잖아. 그봐 아니 저불랑제 잠미다 마동신도 요거 매고래서 장제의 주인에 가서 아니 저부터제 미사와 투지 여바되와도 미사치 예배 여바되고 인장 아니 먼저 주 자소지在那样 저불랑제 잠 마동신도 여도 시 대개매와 장제 추단 자위 아니 더바 임시했어.
So the opponent here is making a broader claim that all entities sort of arise from a kind of cause which has the same capacity to produce mind, and so that position is unacceptable. And particularly here, it's advocated by the Samkhya school of philosophy, of Indian philosophy, which holds that everything, including mind, arises out of a kind of basic nature. Both mental and physical things arise from this kind of basic nature that produces them, and that's not acceptable because the reply here is who but a bovine Samkhya would make an argument expressing the idea that all results exist potentially in the cause. So this position here is saying that all effects occur, pre-exist in a sense, in a potential way within the cause. It follows that it is unacceptable so to argue because you Lokayatas pride yourself on a sense of shame. So here the materialist or Lokayata school is making this kind of claim as well, something like that. It follows that this reason pervades because saying that on the tip of a blade of grass, etc., the prior cause, we could see 100 elephants, the eventual result, then the bovine Samkhya makes that kind of assertion.
Oh yeah, that didn't. Oh, 기타 대우 추단 대우军장 가르에서나 기타란 대우의 주용 오버 여바 좋아 밑에서 대우의 아니 주의등도 주용 오버도 여바 좋아데 밑에봐 그 가르에서나 대우의 주용 원에 연나 아니 디 주용 오 연나 예수 간제 예수의 제바 체네 아니 따바 체디 가나 아니 나도 가지고 고거래서 디 주용 오 연나 주连接 넘버 체제 다수 생장 아니 거기서 저부 관심이 뭐 내와도 주의도 내와도 나로 고고 아래서 나로도 주변 어떻게 주의나 민하게 쳐서 이거는 나 주의나 민하게 쳐.
So the reason this position is sort of bovine is like this. How will that result exist in some form in the cause? It follows that this is unacceptable, that it so exists, because when we seek the result that exists in some form in the cause, then even if we were to divide the cause 100 times and analyze it, that form, visible form, that is suitable to appear as some resultant visible form has not appeared previously at the time of the cause. So if effects pre-existed within their cause, then some kind of visible effect, then necessarily they'd have to appear within, at the time they're simply supposedly latent within their causes, because they possess the same basic character when they're in the at this time of the cause that they exhibit or possess when they have achieved their state of an effect. So that this kind of position of cause existing at the time of the effect is unacceptable.
Oh yeah, that didn't really. Ranji Pember, any do you go ahead there? I'm a sergeant, I'm a sergeant message, or they go by in them. That car said, 타마위 섬전 제마탑이 차소 타마위 섬전 제마탑소 차소建筑 차建筑 소스 주행에 와 매봐 아니다 가시 아니 차라도 제와서 바타스 나를 매봐 싸도 제와지 이서나 아니 차라도 제와서 그래서 아미리 좀 많이 봐 그봐 제마타 차建筑 도마끼리 잠바 아니 차라도 제와지 쓰바타 섬전 탐정 아메 싸도 주의 르이 배 차베서
So then that position again is unacceptable and entails a consequence, or can be expressed as a consequence that entails an independent syllogism. This is on page 370 of the translation, and 226 of the Tibetan. It would follow that it is possible that some ordinary newborn sentient being might be born as a detached being and not be ascertained to originate as an attached being, etc., because by your argument it would necessarily be the case that all sentient beings have a lineage that originates newly without precedent. So that in effect then that being according to their position, that it would entail the absurd or unacceptable consequence that beings would originate without attachment, even because they are newly produced, and that is unacceptable. So then the opponent could come back and say, this is they're debating this claim that we've just made. They would come back and say on the bottom of 371 in the translation, because all persons do not transcend the nature of their causal elements, it is necessarily impossible that those born attached, etc., become detached.
Oh yeah, that delay Gabatella, Nene Juma, Nene Juma, Tumba, Tambo Chata Mississippi, Junjan to Miss Tumba, the Chata Mississippi, Junjan to Mete. Chi Chata to Joa Mississippi, Junjan to Mete. Tipe Gama, and swing what Tambo Della, that you green. Any castle, Jeji Judy, any Judy Daniela Matev Series, Judy Daniela Giores. Any Chasso than Dembe, Chasso the Dembe, Cave, Tambo Chata to Juma, Tender Missito Senas, Tambo Chata to Juma to Missito Senas, Delayed the George. And it Tamja Deja Chechun Tumba Juata, you Tamja. And there's some Yashachi Sumba Jobata, T. Nili, and Jumi Daniel or the Sumba set.
Then the reply to that is, again, the argument that they're making here is because all persons do not transcend the opponent here is saying, because all persons do not transcend the nature of their causal elements, is necessarily impossible that those born attached, etc., would become detached. And then the reply to that is that it follows that the amounts of attachment would be equal or will be equal in all sentient beings, because it's substantial causes, attachments of substantial causes or basic causes would be the elements, and those are equal in all living beings. So that reply doesn't obtain. And then the opponent comes back again and says the amount of attachment, etc., is derived from variations in the amounts of the elements, and then the response to that comes subsequently.
Oh yeah. Kade Juma share Jejungi, Juma share Jejungi, Kabala, and it Chaso Chejun to Juare, Sena. And it Soja Namla, Soja Dan, Che Soja La Sowagi, and it Kabayoko Res, Kanye Della, Nili Juma Della share Chejungi Kabayoba in town. Soja Namla, Soja da Che Soja La Sobe Kabayana, then Dona, and you Temeba de Musungi Sawa. 무슨 그 사와 되나 차소 최종기 개반디 아니 때 중화 강인비 푸드 중화다 저바 그 가서 차소 최종기 개반디 디때 중화 강인바디 아니 푸드 중화다 중화파 리비 리바 신도 차소 중화 피디가 완전 차소 배주도 주와다对吧 예리 중화 총신도 아니 소자 남라양 아니 소자다 최소자라 소비 개발 매장 아니 차장에 최차장라 소비 개발 유비셋
So then the reply to this, the opponent here would argue that the amount of one's attachment and so forth, desire, hatred, and ignorance and so forth, is derived from variations in the amounts of the elements, the material elements that make up the body of the person. That, again, is unacceptable because it would follow that among living beings there will be a distinction between those who are living and those who are very living, because there are variations in the amounts of the elements that are their substantial causes. If that is asserted, it can be refuted by perception. We see visible, there are variations in the elements that make up people's bodies, but they're not consequent or correlated variation in the degree to which they are living. Thus, it follows that whatever elements are the basis of this variation in the amount of attachment, etc., will increase and decrease as they increase and decrease, because in living beings in whom the elements that are the substantial cause are equal, there is no variation from living to very living, but there is a variation from attached to attached. So that argument that they're making doesn't hold weight. If that is asserted, it follows that attachment, etc., could proceed from prior existent to subsequent non-existence because of that assertion.
Oh yeah, that didn't take the na said, and it a then Juma, Pang Bati, put the Juma that Tibachi to Chaso, the Pedro, you are the Duguyana. 아니 차단소 말 여발에 아니 예매도 주어 시바타 말 차단을 담발라 아니 예매도 주어 시바타 가서래 단다 주어다 단다지 다 가르쳐서 다 콘도 시바타 그 페도 주어 시바타 아니 가서 소자는 소자다 치 소자라 소외 차반매자 차장라 소외 차바 여바 티켓 더바 티켓.
So this whole argument doesn't work because if that was asserted, the assertion that's been given above, that attachment, etc., derive from variations in the elements that make up the physical component of a person, then it would follow that attachment, etc., could proceed from some prior form of existence to subsequent total non-existence because of that assertion that they're making, the thing that they themselves accept.
다치 차자도 민주비 군자 미다바데 니와 가데 섬제나 아니 차소 체중 타대장 아니 차바 체중 연구래 아니 차소 예매도 좋아지 수양 쓰고 말해서 차바 때나 차바지 쓰고 말해서 무슨 가르래서나 그 중화 총이 당이 미도배 차베시 중화 요 중화 미도바 인상 안에 더고 차소도 그 말했어 미도배 차베시 제나스 다들 대고바텔라 그는 대자 최종 자와 주와타스 다 섬전 탐자라 섬전라 대자 최종 자와 총와 자와 주와타 아니 차소 계기 주중화 당이 아니 주위 당이 자와 아니 차바 최종 그 예능 그 주의不切的是 주위 당이 자와데 차바 최종 그 예능데 중화 최종 내 차바 최종结果的 중화 최종데 차바 최종 그 아니 예능 그 주의不切
Now then, the opponent could come back and say, even if there are different amounts of attachment and so forth in sentient beings, it is not possible that there is anyone in whom attachment, etc., would become totally non-existent, because the equal nature of the causes, the elements, is irreversible. So the reply to that is that it still follows that the amount of attachment would be similar in all, because the substantial cause of the similar amount of attachment is the similar nature of the element. So the substantial cause here, or the fundamental or material cause, which gives rise to the attachment, etc., according to their position, is this kind of similar nature that exists within the elements having that kind of nature.
Oh yeah. 단지니 디베라 발란제미 미기 시와당 최전 아니 죄라 발란당 치 발란당 아니 치시도 발란라 소위 아니 나바샤비 남비 나바샤비 르바 젠도 여바 마임바타스 라텔라 발란다디 나바샤비 림젠도 나바샤와 여바 마임바타 대다 탐제 발란 마임발라 로비 충비스 발란 마임발라 로데 로바 충비 아니 가소레 로바 충비 나니 송대도 차와를 좀 시와 임버체스 송대 가사나 지체
So then, for example, that illustrates the incoherence of this position is that it would follow that a visual cognition that apprehends a cow does not, or here it's an illustration of how our reasoning actually makes sense, is that, for example, it follows that the visual cognition that apprehends a cow does not successively apprehend arising aspects that are specified as cow, very cow, extremely cow, etc., because that visual cognition is a cognition that originates from taking as its apprehended object the self-nature that is the same as the opposite of what is a non-cow. So this is referring then to the way in which cognition apprehends thought, especially apprehends things through the elimination of that which is their contrary.
Oh yeah, that DJ la, 가서 장변이 루디라 사소 중앙 남나 소자니다 치 소자라 소와 그 차바가 남기는 바 여바 많이 받다 소자라 치중라 소와 그 안에 차바 남기는 바 아니 가지 차바지 좀 여초고 말했어 명인바 가래 중앙라 예리 중앙라 아니 중앙 충바 연장 예리 중앙 인바 유충바 연장 저부터라 차바 영식 말했어.
So then it follows that the word or in the root text verse, in this case, the Lokayata system, this materialist system, which is advocating the idea that consciousness arises from some configuration of matter or physical things, there will not be in the earth and other elements any levels of differentiation of livingness, very living, etc., because of the equality among the elements that are the substantial cause. So here again, the elements, the physical elements that make up the body and thus, according to their position, are the basic source for consciousness and so forth. They're all four elements are present within a body, and therefore we couldn't make the kind of differentiation of living, great livingness, very living, etc., because of the incoherence that follows from that.
我当查查没事吧，他我搞吧你那呢？当我得了，你初老说我其中给是其中给人比开发员那样是，你这一呢，初没比没干呀，也把没把心度是，却没把给没干呀没，也把没把提心度，这样查把了其中员那样。查把也没去，你带那是个嘛的，查把也没去带那没做说钱呐，那个开始钱，他这辈子也搞不得了，别人送把嘛用把他是，除了其中用把了，除了没别没干呀，没把没进度，也那些查把其中也叫查把也没说把的，别人送把嘛用把他，除了的没在线用把才嘛搞不起，除了没在线用把的才嘛搞不起。我就在先人把这才嘛搞不起，对吧？康熙绿了，天先都也被原点掐说替他缺钱是，绿了，我前都也被原点掐说替他缺钱，在先都也被，你替他你就业搞不了来的，吃不了酒啊，是把他是。就业搞不来了，你掐说替他吃不了酒啊，去是把他。就我配对去开发单单把来，去配对去开发的酒肉。就我配对去开发去人把单单把来，去配对去开发的酒，去这张，你招容天现一不现的是，是吧？别那比车搞不了啥话心了是，
Now then, here comes then the refutation of the example that's being presented by the opponent here to support their claim, and there's actual refutation of that, and then the consequence that attachment is impossible according to their position. So the opponent could come back and say, although there are variation in the levels of intensity of heat, there does not exist any fire that is not hot. So the element fire is always hot. So also in this case, although there are distinctions in the amount of attachment, it is impossible that attachment become non-existent. And then the reply to that is that it follows that the objects in the example are not equivalent because the idea that fire is substantially other than heat, is of a different substance than heat, has been authoritatively through valid reasoning refuted. And it follows that it is possible that those qualities of attachment, etc., that exist as objectively separate from some body would be cut off in the case of some elements because their variations of increase and decrease come from the elements possessing variations in the levels of their own increase and decrease. But they are objectively separate and suitable for separation from the elements, just like white and other colors of a blanket.
Oh yeah, that didn't. Oh, that's 차소 최전 수소 차소 대다 안에 수라 소와게 안에 종교 신도 안에 중화라 중화랑 내가 많이 바타서 종교 대다 중화를 내가 나신 차소 안에 중화라 종교 신도 내가 많이 바타 내가 많이 바타 대다 중화당 예매자로 많이 대다 중화의 예매 잠미롱화 인스 중주 대다 중화의 예매 잠미롱화 인 차소 대다 아니 중화단 자롱 텐션이 비슷.
Then, so it would also follow that attachment, etc., are not ascertained to abide in the elements, as do such secondary qualities as a visible form, etc. So, just like the blanket is the base for white, the color white, it's not the case, that relationship isn't the case with attachment, etc., related to the elements. So, just as the elements, the attachment, etc., are not ascertained to abide in the elements, as do such secondary qualities as visible form, etc. These other derivatives, things that are derived from the primary elements of earth, water, fire, wind, etc. Visibility, visible forms, and so forth, because it is unsuitable that they be connected inseparably with those elements, and because they are objectively separate and suitable to be separated from the elements.
다들이 가지 되니 있어가라 차소당 중준이고 되니 아니 중앙라 자도 미루고 총수세나 차소당 중준이고데 중앙라 자도 미루고데 아니 총발에서나 무슨 말에 총발에서 어 차소당 아니 중준이고데 아니 중앙당 자도 미루고데 총발말에 가래에서나 차소당 중준이고데 중앙당 자도 미루고 총발이나 차단이 오되 아니 생주도 깨와타고 깨와래스 생주도 깨워 쳐봐도 대단하스 총나 차단이 오되 생주도 깨와타고시 생주도 깨고 와도 가래에서는 내리 중화질에 깨와대 내리 중화질에 상원 깨와 예장 아니 뒤지도 깨고래 생주도 깨고래스.
So then the opponent can come back and say those two are equal, that is attachment and the elements and so forth, rather those two are equal in unsuitability for connection with the elements, and then the reply to that is it follows that they are not equivalent cases, that is the relationship between the elements and attachment on the one hand, and elements and their derivative qualities of visibility and so forth. It follows that they are not equivalent cases because if what you have asserted were the case, it would follow that attachment, anger, etc. would arise simultaneously with the elements. it follows that they would arise simultaneously and together because they would arise from the single substantial cause, the elements. The two would, because the basic cause of them would be the elements, attachment, and the derivatives of the elements would necessarily have to arise simultaneously in this fashion.
다 되니 내가 가서를 해주기 기회와 말이스. 와 현재 기회 기회에 봐도 가르쳐서 미jen게 왕기 직자도 매지고 싫어서 권이 미jen게 왕기 아니 현재도 매지 보면 직자도 매지고 있으나 아니 가서래 차소 대달라 아니 치료지 소유 아니 최지 소유도 기회 치료지 되는 데는 叫말이스. 차단 대다 치 수석이 유라 때는 수석이 무장진에 叫말이스. 차단 제제 치 최지 소유지 치료지 태양 치 수석 아니 랑가 叫你些많이 바타스 또배나바 다베세가 뒤수유 아니 랑가 또배 다베 답변아 ten지라서와 또배 다베 아니 수유 증바 얘기 차소 제와의 치료 그 수유를 떼어 말했어.
So then the opponent could come back and say, well, these arise through the power, attachment, etc., arise through the power of an objective condition that's an object condition, something that they observe, that are the objects of attachment and so forth, not simultaneously. And then the reply to that is, it follows also that anger, attachment, etc., are sometimes not ascertained to arise with external objects as their apprehended objects because they are minds that can apprehend objects that are merely imputed by mind, or one could say here also that they're that sometimes attachment and etc., anger and so forth apprehend objects. Here the objects could be referred to an internal object like a concept, and concepts are merely conceptually constructed by mind. They don't have external objects as their basic cause, the observed object there. Rather, the observed object is simply a concept that is something which is a mental construct, conceptually constructed.
Oh yeah, that is 차단미스 비준전되라. that 이제 어디 가서를 탐하와 나라 차소 주민에 와면아 차소 주민에 와면 봐. 아니 차소 주민에 와면 봐. 예매도 아니 중화 차소 주마이나 아니 탐하와 나라 차소 주민에 와면 봐. 아니 예매도 타 차소 예매도 타와다. 고라 중화에 가는 거 아니 가는 거 주단 차위지. 주민이 차소가 유매제 봐 이제 가는 거 주단 차위 차려서. 가념 그 주선을 랑게는 같이 맞게책. 그러나 아니 중앙예례 인호선아 중앙예례 인호선아 차소가 예례 인호선아 아니 대자라서 너는 그 아니 교우 탐자가 교육근지 제가 좋았다. 좋았다. 뒤중 아니 그 중화 다반여와 예외치리 그 다반여와 예장 아니 다반을 더우지 뒤다도 겨고래서.
So then the opponent here, then there's a rejection of this view that mind arises from the material elements because of the consequence that attachment would become impossible, the absurd consequence that attachment would be impossible. And then here our position is that it follows that in ordinary beings, etc., ordinary beings, attachment and so forth would not be ascertained to originate, that they wouldn't occur, or would become completely non-existent because they would be separate from a corresponding cause, a cause which is of a similar type with them, that is of the same sort of nature. The opponent would say, comes back and to their default position that the elements are the substantial causes of attachment and so forth. And then the reply to that is that it would follow that all minds of attachment, etc., will arise in all sentient beings at all times, because the elements, permanent elements that are their causes are present. That is, the material elements would be present, and according to their position are permanent. Then those causes being present at all time, then attachment and all of these mental afflictions would arise in all sentient beings at all times.
Oh yeah, that digi to bond the ma ching chen da chaji shi dunga ge de chaji shi na ne da ka sa shi sob chi da ge ching so o mi da dunga dong da me shi na ne ani dunga de chaji shi na ne tong chaji shi tang bo de ani da ka sa dunga mi da ba wa mi da ba dunga wa 是吧？啥才叫年龄确实是谈不动啊，听你谁讲了？啥叫年龄碰不动，碰不得下上就有劲的。但这没大把人的，看上就搞那些钱呢，人家叫我没没钱，人家叫大来没大把出。人家他没大别大来，俺那动啊我出吧也没得，是吧？啥叫年龄碰不得缺钱，动啊我人的，得了。 他没大别大了，主要有他那对了，他那几年没错去担心不起来噻。哦，你话参加一个担心个，这啥叫年龄就碰不得嘞？年龄就向往讲碰不得了，但呢，俺那东啊他们这个用过有往一张，东啊他们这碰不得了，但呢用往一张，他的年龄错去担心不起当。 我就两年级向往见也没起来，手他两年级向往见也没起来，是有的。两年级向往见的，对这个东啊给谈到，是吧？对这个东啊说的，两年级向往见了，向往见也没起来是。他真的什么？人家让我大哥我没得，让我大哥我没得是干了，他对了。 他说的，然后那个我没大把当，没大被想法建议没吃的是第那个，然后那个我没把说的，我这边吃就单位在那马家我吃，当完了马家呢，是吧？没大把当，都是说的，然后那个我讲，然后没大，突然间就那个我要把马爷的没大把当，俺那没大把当想法建议没吃的是。 没大把的来，你想往前一没钱的是。你他真的希望的，我这边吃就去东巴谁的，俺你他说的，吃去希望的来家呢，是吧？你突然间一打起那个东巴没人把钱，人家为这个东巴来家呢，希望呢人家为这个东巴也得往上往为，那个亲戚了吧没把买，那个亲戚了吧没钱的是。
Now then, that concludes in a basic discussion of showing how samsara necessarily has to be beginningless, and how, particularly how mind can't arise from physical elements because of the incoherent and unacceptable consequences that would arise from holding that view. We've given a kind of rough presentation of the refutation of that wrong view and the entailments that come out of that. Then next comes the explanation, the definition of the truth of suffering, and how, and this is done through the special, the four special features or particular qualities that suffering is impermanent and so forth, that those four aspects or special characteristics of suffering. The first of the four particular qualities is that suffering is impermanent because it is seen to arise occasionally. So the fact that it is occasional, that any particular event of suffering, this is any particular state of the aggregates that are controlled by mental affliction and contaminated karma, they occur only occasionally, not constantly. So therefore, suffering, which is the aggregates here, is impermanent. Second, suffering is suffering because it is the basis of the collection of present flaws or defects, and also because it is under the external power of previous causes, the contaminated karma and the mental afflictions. These reasons show why it is that suffering is suffering. It has that quality. Then the third, suffering is without an essential independent or autonomous self, or we could say here the suffering is devoid of any kind of self that has the character of being autonomous. It doesn't have that. There's no self like that within the aggregates or designated upon them even. So suffering is without a self which is autonomous or has an independent character, because it is impermanent and under the external power that is controlled by other things, that is the mental afflictions and karma, contaminated karma. So these three then as well show sequentially that one proves one quality, and then that the quality then serves as the reason to prove the next quality, the next aspect of the Four Noble Truths, of the truth of suffering, in sequence like that. And therefore, as well, so in the third one here, the absence of an autonomous self, that's referring here at the most basic level that the self doesn't exist as a kind of autonomous, substantially existent thing. It doesn't exist in that way. And so therefore, suffering is devoid of that. That's selfless, that is specifying there. And then derived from that, fourth, suffering is void or empty, because it is not controlled by any independent or autonomous self either.
Oh yeah, that is Tongba in the wrong with that, wrong with that, Sigila, what Micheles. That Pombo Church and that, wrong with that is wrong with that, Sigila, my Indi, wrong with that, any made teach you to me, Micheles. 다 대체지 아니 시기로 봐 많이 미치지 좀 매비체 대다 아니 대답아 임비체에서 가나 라오이 다데 치료기 답아 되버인장 대승이나 대답아 임비체디 차와다 답아 치다를 양 제제 임바 미대비체.
So then on page 378 at the top, the aggregates are not controlled by a self. This word controlled means sort of like have dominate, have the self as the thing that dominates them or controls them, because that self is not their cause. That is, so where the self, where it says that the suffering is empty, the aggregates are empty, that means that they are not sort of like the possession or something which is possessed by or dominated by a self, because that self is not their cause. It doesn't. There is no such autonomous, substantially existent self. This follows because that self, as it's posited by the non-Buddhists, such a self would have to be permanent according to their view, and that doesn't exist.
Oh yeah, that about Chigla, any Pumbo Tuma, Tungaji Tadaba Javade, any Naji Tadaba Java Jura Mitaba, Databa Indang, Taba Chile, any Pumbo Tuma. Tuyungamadan Chijava Tadava Javade, you want me about the Kayaka Tabati, you remember teacher. Teacher. That is Sunjin Washi, Sujin Washi Della, and then one year, Chuji Gushan in Bachespon, who they said, Wang Bodang. 아니 이왕에 현 취지 주의만 가려 보고 그래서 미전 여봐도 보고 그래. 그래서 뭐 네가 주대 까까로 주 아니 주현 안보당 이여양 이니 초나양 아니 왕신 미져봐도 가려래서나 뭐 초나양 저거 매대 가르쳐 줘야 통해 처리를 했어. 다디 가서래 万一你来先别先就没见有把它报告的是吧？就要同意去，大把就没用话，他军队大把的呢，大把拿来也把没被吃了。
So then it follows that this reason obtains or pervades, because how could a permanent entity be a generator, that is, produce something? It can't function as a cause because it doesn't change, it doesn't have any capacity to affect other things. It is unacceptable that it could. It follows, therefore, that it is not acceptable that the multiple aggregates would arise at different earlier and later times from one permanent self, because such a supposed permanent entity is not a cause. So this is summarizing basically the idea that a permanent thing can't function as a cause, and in any case, and certainly can't produce multiple diverse things, and it couldn't produce them in a different sequence of time, order of time, earlier and later, because itself is permanent and doesn't change. And then a sense cognition that apprehends a visible form would be able to be inferred from another cause that just the faculties, other cause than just the faculties in the mind, because we see that in some instances when some causes, the faculties in mind together are collected, the result does not arise. In some other instances it does arise. So this shows that a permanent entity couldn't function as a source, like a self or something like that. Also couldn't serve as a source for the arising of cognition, sensory cognition, perception, and so forth, and because of the variation in the way in which it arises, something again permanent. It says, it follows that it is unsuitable that a permanent entity be a cause, because that absence of cause and effect result does not exist when permanent entities are involved.
Oh yeah, that digi dunga ke chachi sho de du chene. Da ni wa kunjun den ba la. Da kunjun la jo kunjun ra ji kin na ba shi yue ben na ne. Ani da sa je ni len ji pong bo digi ju ani ju da jia wa di ju da jia wa zu de se. 那通过的人个结果印章，人个结人个没结果的，那你就来等那穷话印章，就当结果主的，人个结果印不起来是。那人个结呢就当结果主把的，那你看着人开完主把的，就见现了没得我穷话的就没印不起来，就当有点矛盾呢。 아니 기존 현람 믿어와 중화다 규모에 임베치잖아 뒤에 따도 여봐 나야 매봐 주고 그래서
So then that concludes the overview of the truth of suffering. Turning to the truth of origination, it has the four aspects that were enumerated previously, and the first of these is discussed, its aspect of being cause. And so this aggregation of suffering is proven, this is at the bottom of 379, this aggregation of suffering is proven to have a cause because it is something that arises occasionally. So suffering, the aggregates which are contaminated aggregates which arise due to the force of karma and mental affliction, have a cause because they arise occasionally. They don't arise in a permanent fashion. And then there's a proof for that, which is at the top of 380. It follows that suffering originates, and this is the opponent's position here, the opponent might say, it follows that suffering originates independent of other causes and conditions because it is uncaused. If that is asserted, that view, that it just arises naturally or spontaneously or something like that, then it would follow that suffering is either a permanent existent or will be forever non-existent because of the assertion that it is uncaused. So if something doesn't have a cause, it has to necessarily be either permanent, and here permanent existent refers to something which is actually incoherent, a permanent positive functional thing, or it would be forever totally non-existent because it is uncaused.
Oh yeah. That's the thing. I'm going 아니 가서를 유명을 되어 인상 세마당 세마기 넘어대당 세마기 넘어당 세마리리라 써와 봐. 기타 세마당 아니 세마라 소와 그 세마 노와 니당 자마 동부라 소와 니라 소와 아니 제바부 주시 제바부 주시 안 매바 대다르스 아니 뭐 대다 탐제자 주메도 주로시나 어다 시장변바다 제바발라 소와나 가지라도 제도 다 세미 노와 소지 주요와 타 세마 노와 당 자마르르 소와지 주요와 주베데라 세마 노와 소지 주요와 타 대신 아마 강여바 니나 치마 강제와 대세 아마 강여바 치마 강제와데 아마 강주나 아니 주나야 나바 주양 아마 티니 심이 주랍도 제소서와 린장 아마 대 린자 치마 그 주레세 대양 가랑 아마 강주나야 나바 주에 린장 아마 대대 아니 치마 너무 가서 사만 오미 린장 아마테 아니 린자 치마 그 주레세 사마라 소와야 린장 아마테 린자 치마테 린장 아미 주레세 되나 아마 강주나 나바 주에 아니 린장 아마테니 치마테 그 주랍도 제자세 아니 제수 전도 자사 되니 텐더이 체만 남아서라 예비체세 아미 체만 넘으면은 제기 체만 넘어도 매봐 아마 그 자마르리 되면은 뒤쳐서 좀 자마르리 되면 매봐
Now then, so some philosophers of the Lokayata or materialist school, Mimamsakas, who are a ritualist school of followers of the Veda, etc., they express the idea that just as the sharpness of a thorn and the roundness of a pea, etc., are without any cause that is their producer, so these suffering entities, the aggregates, etc., will arise without a specific cause. They hold that there's just sort of a natural origination of things without the specific causes. It follows that the sharpness of a thorn, etc., the reply to that is that it follows that the sharpness of a thorn, etc., do have a cause, because we see that when some objectively separate previous entity exists, then some subsequent entity or thing arises. Or when some previous entity or thing is transformed, then that previous entity, when it is transformed, is expressed as the cause of that subsequent entity that arises in its place. So that's the basic model of causality here, that something prior changes or into or produces something subsequent. It follows through positive and negative concomitants that those qualities, the sharpness of a thorn, etc., also have a cause. So here, when we're talking about the sharpness of a thorn, we see that thorns arise from thorn bushes, which have previous thorn bushes as their cause, so that sharpness of an existing thorn didn't arise just spontaneously or from some sort of undefined nature. Rather, it had a specific cause, a previous thorn bush that was sharp. The same thing with peas. Peas are round, and they come about from earlier peas that were also round.
아니, 다 되제라. 초밥집이 봐서나. 아니 와서 수소 아니 수시 제제 지부디 띵도 아니 중시 초바여 봐 중화시 초바입니다 중주 초여와 연장 초바집이 뒤띵기 아니 르자 되게 르자 되게 수통여 와시 그 주인아 대 르자의 수통여 와시 그 주인 거래서와 대윤고와의 가래라서나 초바집이 르자 되면은 아니 왕시도 그 말에 대면은 매비시 된자위 아니 초바집에 르바지 쳐져 수토요 왕시라 무슨 매변양 다들라 양 그 잡이 가라 무슨 왕시라 무슨 매변양 스타디 르자데 수토요 순지 미시가 왕시기 안미게 마인바 순대 마인바 무슨 매변양 이제 매변양 뒤 근전 좀 인데 뒤 가념만 대다 현지기위 주인 비체스 달래지기위도 초바지를 내야 된다. 그러와 편지퇴념 제대로 편지퇴념 제대로 장인 편지제와를 크미셔 봐 이장. 어디 이장 현지기위 주인 비체 가념만 현지기위 주인 비체. 괜히 퇴념 초바지 봐 현지 중화 점남라 현재 중화 점을 줄 따와 점을 선 대니 뒤에 뭐 초바지 봐 현재 중화 점을 줄 따와 점을 선
So then the opponent might come back and say, well, then it follows that the tangibility of a single composite is the cause of a sense cognition that sees form, because if tangibility did not exist, there would be no sense cognition. So tangibility, it means like the tactile, when you touch things, you get a tactile or sensation, and then, but it would be the cause of the visual perception, a sense cognition that sees a visible form, because if tangibility did not exist, there would be no sense cognition, the visual awareness of the thing. So the reply to that is that the tangibility of the elements is merely a condition for the sense cognition seeing form, meaning the visual perception which sees a visible form. It does not directly bring it about, because it is the corresponding or simultaneously occurring cause of that form, that visible form. It is, here it says imputed, but it's merely designated as a cause, which is as the simultaneously occurring cause of a single simultaneous composite. Thus, the tangibility of the elements is a cause of the sense cognition that sees a form, which is a secondary quality that is its own result, only because it is a corresponding cause of such a form. So here it's saying we call such a thing like the tangibility or the ability to touch a visible form as a thing which is a visible form, as well as being a tactile object, because we say we give it the name of a cause because it exists simultaneously with, or the properties that make it something which is suitable to be touched are also properties that make it suitable to be visible, but it's not causal in the sense of cause and effect of two subsequent things.
Oh yeah, that 괜찮대나. 아니 다 주의 봐. 아 중화 시기나 게르자당. 주의 바탕. 아니 랑대 중주 시가나 중화를 주의르자. 중화를 주의르자게 아니 수 중화 주의 랑대 중주기 수통위르자. 중주기 아니 수스리가 러자도 통요 왕시기 주인데 인데 아니 대적관념 그 주인 비쳤어. 그러니까 와 된다고디 중화주의 러자디 중주지 러자 통요 왕시의 그 주인데 주의 바 대라 때네 중주지 수도 왕시의 기와 연장 아니 대적관념 그 주인 비쳤어.
So these are called they're designated as being causes in the sense like the tangibility and visibility of something are designated as being causes of each other, but this is a kind of a metaphorical usage of the term cause, in which properties that you have a configuration of the elements, the four elements, earth, water, fire, and wind, creating an object, and then that object has both visibility, it can appear as a visible form, as well as being something that's tactile, tangible in the sense of being something you can touch. So the visibility and the tangibility of the thing can be talked about metaphorically as being causes of each other, because they coexist within a thing that has those properties, but they're not causal in the sense of functioning as cause and effect of each other in that way.
Oh yeah. That day 아니 동아 주단 제와는 동아랑가 제와 연단 줄에 제와 줄에 제자 아니 중화 그지 아니 중화 주체나 소와 제와 많이 봐 아니 동아 그 주간 주대 가르래서나 주근 주께서 없이 시간 나네 아니 주대 가르래서나 내다 녀머니 샤야 됐다 주근 주샤야 돼 그거래 그래서 일단 되게 동아 주단 제와당 아니 중화라 미제바당 다음에 동아데 가르치고 와래서나 아니 내다 녀머니 제와 내가 녀마를 저한테 주네. 아니 그 남바데 주네. 다 주. 군중 세가라 군중 그 남바니 아니 와주라서 왜 주질래 장 동아중아 아니 동아중아 스바 마이데 다 치료가 가시기 동아왕주 그 차와도 봐 인장 와주라서 와 주질래 장 동아중아 스바 마이데 와주 다바 달라 도지 바 그 누가 메게 셔 그러와 대매바데 다바 주인 바 가스 가슴 셔 니네 되메지레와 동아지 주인 바 까네 라 되메지 레레와 동아지 주인 바 까네 아니 동아가 줄 쳐봐 까네 줄 쳐봐라 아니 군중 중화 라 쳐봐라 동아 제제 그 주소 그 쳐봐라 아니 군중 중과 됐단 말이야.
So then, above, then it's been explained how the material elements can serve as the physical elements that make up the body, for example, or external objects. These can serve as a basis for perceptible qualities of things, and in that sense, these perceptible qualities of things then serve as a cooperative cause for the arising of, for example, sense perception of objects or sensations of things that we experience from interaction with physical objects, and then conceptuality arises from interaction with visible objects and physical objects and so forth, from them serving as triggers for the arising of concepts within the mind. But it's not the case that the material elements are the primary or principal cause of the arising of awareness, consciousness, perception, and so forth, because of the demonstrations that have been given above, showing the absurd consequences it would obtain if merely physical things produced mental events. So that has been discussed above, and then specifically showing how attachment and so forth, which are the sources of the contaminated aggregates, these couldn't derive from a simply physical process of causality. And then, so this turns into the next subject, the aspect of all origination, the feature of the truth of origination, of its producing things, everything. It is also not possible that suffering originate from a unique cause, such as God, etc., because God, etc., or Ishvara in the Sanskrit here, are not able to generate a result. This follows because we have already refuted the idea that permanent entities can function as causes, can be causes. And having refuted the idea that individual sufferings have an independent, autonomous entity as their cause, we have shown that they are all necessarily originated from a collection of causes. It requires a collection, not just a single, and especially not a permanent cause.
Oh yeah, that in it is la kunjung you kunjung that did in a rap the rabje said Dungash let a new when you would any Dungashu trouble judging by in that rabje numbers has a dollar to song in that rabje number la rabjing or down lunga pawa Tambo data castle is an you made a double like your missiba teacher. 다사제니리 풍부의 가와를 주고래서나 시방원반 대비 아니 가서 쓰세 봐 가서 원반 대비 쓰세서나 아니 대리라 중요한 나사로 잖아 아니 시비 된데달래 아니 시비 된데니라 시비 된데들래체 아니 시비 된데니 뭐체是吧？我听着我你，俺那试试的，俺这东西就人的，看个钱呢，没那么那里浪去了，说话个有些吃不了，用水真正的，那里浪去了，说有些吃不用水真正，俺那200呢。俺那卡说的，他们都去400、300、700吃的是，叫我200多吧的，是吧？俺那恰当太当的，我说真把200呢，要是真去200呢，他们都去400、300、700吃。 용진당 군진 제와양 아니 렘발라 줘봐 세라 숨기나가나 세라 숨지 세바 숨지나 렘발라 줘봐 세비겐지 렘바 세가라 담보라 아니 세바체 아니 렘비단데 두고인다 세비겐지 렘바시 엄마 두지 그 유래다 바이노 세다 단데야라 주니시 난데도 주비 엄마 두지 길래데라 아니 세바 렘바 엄마 두지 그 주심 가시니 오데 안에 tum제 가시니 오데 엄마 두비 tum제 바라와이다 아니 세바당 렘바 세비겐지 렘바 시바 엄마 두지 그 유래다 바레세 엄마 두비 주제다라 세바 숨
Now then, the aspect of of strong arising, that aspect of the truth of origination is explained as follows: because of that impossibility that anything arise without a cause, or from a permanent entity, the cause of suffering, which is the resultant suffering, is the craving for existence that manifestly craves, or one could say intensely craves, or even obsessively craves samsaric existence, because of which people grasp completely at particular objects such as abodes, bodies, and enjoyments, and they crave them with a thought desiring to obtain them. The expression grasping completely and all grasping here refer to actually obtaining, so that the phrase obtained by the condition that is craving, obtained by the condition that is craving, shows a cause and result that manifestly accomplish one another. So this is referring then to the factors of dependent origination, where you have existence, craving, and grasping, or in the order craving, grasping, and existence. Those factors of dependent origination, which are the actualizing causes that produce rebirth within samsara. And then so those are explained within this passage, showing that by craving something, we grasp at it. Craving is sort of a mental attitude, and then grasping is an action, and then existence is the result that comes out of that, the rebirth within samsaric existence. So when it says by the factor of craving, one grasps, that shows the causality there, which is taking place within the 12 factors of dependent origination. The causality there, where grasping functions as the cause for, craving acts as the cause for grasping, the activity of grasping, which then actualizes the existence, rebirth within samsara.
Oh yeah. 나 뒤에 가서 농가 빵만 되라. 아니 오늘 돌에 농가 군중과 밥이 된바 가셔나서 군중 된바 가셔나. 강디 세바 해서 세바 숨 주숨 받아 가로 셔나. 세바 숨세데 지당 안에 가서 그래. 다 원래만 통구 이제 대오대 통구 있어. 세바 숨세데 아니 원래만 통구 간디 세바 해서 세바 숨 주숨 받아 가로 셔나. 세바 숨 주숨 받대 숨바탕. 내리 longe tendo nyawa jusha ba ni wote gawa ane gawa sha ba gawa ya ma de se ba siba sum jusha ba da ne lu longe tendo nyawa jusha ba ni la gawa ya ma de se ga re re se gen jian kan ge jian na yu ji cha ba tendo nyawa siba de ni se ni sibi se ba ba 가서래 요지 개발 전도인이 세바 되는 세바 대비 세세연라 대비 세세연라 요 대비 세세연라 요지 개발 전도인 대전에 좋아 소자 대도 탐대다 단대 주바 제반 단대 주바 대단히 지다 세바 연바 대 좋아 내가 토바 대비 세바당 동안 난다와 대비 세바 어두스 주가래 이때 예로서 요지 쳐봐 튼튼이 세바 되니 수바 되비세세 예라스 야 소자 남대와 타바대바세 소자 대도 텀대다 단대 대바 대바니 지다 세바 임바 되세가라 대라대와 타바대바 대라 되비세바 동화단 도와 되바대라 아니 지세 단대 소자 대도 텀대다 단대 지바니 아니 지다 세세 임바 되서나지 소자 대와 타바 대바다 동안 도와를 대비 유라 주비 세바 대단히 림바시도 대세다 지세 임바 대비 체르서 어디든가 남들 사회 지대 소자 대도 텀대다 단대 지바 대바니 대다 세바 임바 대세도 어디 대와 타바 대바데 아니 대비 세바당 동화단 자와 대바데 아니 지세 임바 되고 지비 세바 임바 대비 체르
then someone might come back with a qualm and say, this explanation that we've given above contradicts the scriptural teaching that the cause of suffering is the threefold craving, and indicated in such passages as, what is the noble truth of the origination of suffering? Whatever is craving. And the reply to that is there's no contradiction here. It follows because of that there's no contradiction between the scriptural teaching that the cause is the threefold craving and the explanation that the cause is the desire to obtain such objects as abodes, bodies, and enjoyments, because we assert that craving that is intent on specific particular objects is the craving for existence, that is the desire for samsaric existence. And here this is referring particularly to desire to be born in any of the realms of existence. While those cravings that relate to objects by way of living beings' desire to obtain pleasure and their desire to avoid suffering are respectively the desire for sense pleasure and the desire for annihilation. So there are three types of desire or craving here. Craving for existence, which is the one that triggers rebirth and samsara. Then the craving for pleasure, pleasurable objects, and then craving to be free from or to even to destroy things which are judged to be unattractive or displeasing to one, the craving to destroy those things. There are those three types of craving.
Oh yeah, that is the Karasora or Rabjiki, Siadegi, any doing Rabji saying, Sundi Zamba, unable Tanda Kasore, Tuchi do, and a Seba, Sebati and Suni. That didn't change number, you're matching to the set that you say about your bitch. Do Kunjun, and Rabji, changing number. Change number telaya, and it has on the Shebak, Sebastian to Tambata. And Sebastian to Tambatella, Shechu Goba, Tela Sumba Bamba, Chenicana. That Sebati changing number in Sirua, Jay a condition of Sevate, around there, Yasi Chima Kenji Chibet, Biche. Sebati. Yasi Chimaki and the castle and the Yasi Chimakalaji Chibetan, Bakare, and in Dava Mimba, Dava Dushamba, Dusheba, Yambata. Member Yula and the Juba Chua T-shirt. Dava Mimba, Dava Dushaba, Gatanda Tata, Dushi Chiji Lote, Jume Mindi, Tenderby, and the castle at Dava Mimbala, and the Dora Dushaba Tigi, Dushi Chiji Lotea, Jume de Mare, Jume Lekiva Mare, Teso Karesana, Nugunti Tawane, Tianchi Totala Chung, so the Dadu Sabukula Jores, Danzinja Tela Dena Chata. Diana Shanduchi, Dashan Shella, Zinda Cha, or the Tedado Chabe Junior Jewish.
Now, then, the aspect of the origin of suffering, origination of suffering, here showing that it is a condition that the origination of suffering is a condition which gives rise to suffering, is explained 383. Therefore, craving has the aspect of condition because it is the cooperative basis of its own result, a subsequent samsaric existence. It follows that craving is thus because by perceiving, or one could say even conceiving as pleasurable that which is not pleasurable, those who are degenerate, who fall into a low state of existence, will enter into all lower spheres, that they'll engage in all kinds of lower forms of behavior, and then as a result of that fall into lower spheres of existence. That distorted perception or misconception is not causeless because it arises through a cause that is attachment to the self. Here, attachment, it could be translated also as like excessive affection for the self.
Tā tēlā, tē kāsō nūngā pāngwā tērē wē, nūngā pāngwā tēlā, sēpa chīmā yāngsī chīmī jū yīmbā tā, yāngsī chīmī jū yīmbā tā, sēpa yāngsī chīmī jū yīmbā tā, yāngsī chīmī jū yīmbā tā, sēpa tē, anī rāngi kiawā chīmā kī, yāngsī chīmā kī jū yīmbā tā, chātrā jā chōmbā kī, sēpa pāngwā yīnzāng, 아니 세바 왕기 양시 치마 껴 마통이 체르스 그봐 양시 치마 껴는 아니 차다 좀 봐, 세가나 아니 좀 봐, 대다 그 녀모 세바 방바 인자 세바 방바 인자 세바 방바 인자 유세바 방바 인자 아니 대우 뒤 왕기 양시 치마 껴와 마통이 체르.
Thus, it follows that craving is the cause of a subsequent existence, samsaric existence, because we do not see a detached one, referring to someone who is an arhat, who has eliminated attachment and other mental afflictions from their mind. We don't see them born into a subsequent samsaric existence, because by virtue of the fact that they have utterly gotten rid of craving, and this is taught by the earlier masters.
다지니 가서래 충바 방바 테라 다야 되라 오늘 류에 장 대자 충대스 류에 발라 차바 마동 칠 배나 차다 겨와 마도배 차바 스마기 주인 바신도스 차다 겨와 마도배 차바 스비주 임바신도스 차바오 다디기两个 대가바 테라 류에 차비 주점 류에 차비 주점도 좀나 투신 투다스 류에 차비 주점 이나이네 되니 류 차비 주점이 받더니 나도 인자 투신 투바레스 주디 주점도 나라 산제 나바 산제베 되비셔 데 우리 현지시 주점도 나라 캐래 비셔 주인바 까바 가로세나 나가르 주인바 까바단 가로세나 르 차비 규정인바 꼬바냐 마인데 예린다 현지시 캐바제 인바데 아니 까바레 차비 예린다 현지시 캐바지 현지시 캐바제 인바 까바자 마도 규정인바데 까바 마레스.
Now then the opponent might come back here and say, well then attachment also originates from the body because we do not see attachment in one who is bodiless. For example, you yourself, you Buddhists, assert that since we do not see a detached one take birth, attachment must be the cause for the arising of a subsequent samsaric existence. The reply to that is that if you were to prove just that the body is a cause of attachment, then you prove what is already proven, because the Buddha has asserted that it is just a cause, a mere cause. This follows because we have already accepted the assertion that it is just a cooperative condition. That is, so the body, we've already accepted that bodies can be cooperative conditions for the arising of attachment, but we've rejected the position that attachment to other mental afflictions arise just with bodies as their substantial or primary material causes that produce them.
다 진이 지제라 아니 가서로 잠배 랑이 지장 아니 라니 껴와 라니 이 더바 껴왕가지 매발을 내가 차와다 저랑기 더바 되기 저랑기 껴왕가지 매발 대달을 내가 차와다 가르 상제바 르바 차바 류지 주인비 제수자네 상제비 르바 차바 류지 주점인바 티 제수자네 아니 특별히 안다도 꽤네 리 차비 주대비체.
Then the opponent might come back and say, well, this contradicts your previous refutation of the idea that the body is the cause of attachment, but the reply there is that we have not refuted the idea that the body is a mere cause, a cause of attachment. That is, we accept that it can be a cause or condition for the arising of attachment, because we have cleared away the idea only that the body is the substantial, or when it's a primary or material cause, or the special cooperative condition that gives rise to attachment. And then it follows that the Lokayatas, or these materialists, themselves will damage their own assertion that there are no past or future lives, because they are following the Buddhist reasoning, which proves that attachment is the cause of the body, and they have set forth the correct example and asserted that the body is the cause of attachment. So these materialists have presented, using Buddhist arguments, have presented the Buddhist case already.
Oh yeah, that's any idea. 아니, 내 가르쳐고 말해서나 가디 리께와라 차바 통기. 아니, 시안라 마도 차바 가디지고 와서 리께와라 되나 차바 통기 시안라 마도 미칠. 리께와당 현직도 대자 중개에서. 리께와당 현직 대자지랑 안 뒤에 공원도 안에 대자지 봐 마인배. 아니, 리 대자지 대부 마인이잖아. 마인이노 리 대자가 대부 말해 sana wana deja lejan lijido deja jan lijido mayin bata korang deja ani deja dan lu ni hanji de chu sel dana jama deja lijido mayina jama tabi deja ji ngar deja songwa jama tabi deja ji ngar deja songwa tuba yin bata jama tabi ani deja ji ngar ani deja amang on songwa tuba yin bata tini kanem mi gula ji sel.
Now the opponent could come back and say, because we do not see any other source of apparent visible attachment in a body at birth, attachment that has not arisen before is simultaneous with the birth of the body, and so the body is not the result of attachment. So they're arguing against the Buddhist position that body arises in part from the previous attachment. And then the reply to that is, well then, it also follows that attachment is not the result of the body, because the two are asserted to originate simultaneously. If that is asserted, it follows that the attachment immediately after birth is proven as coming from previous attachment, because it arises from its corresponding cause.
Oh yeah, that's about Chibu. 아니 사장님이 풍부디 아니 요새바 지보이나 아니 마르바당 아니 세바당 아 세바세는 숨 마르바다 세바다 레숨보데 아니 동아지 주샤바당 가로 세나 아데 미게미레 사지 가서 야니 가고아레 네가서 미시시비 주야 마지스바 니니지 주니 펜바 차베지 타마타 길야장인 세타 남들 자와라 소마나신 미시시비 주야 마지스바 니제베스 미시시 마르바데 시비 주레스 미시시비 최양스 야스치마제지 그 주이양 미시시비 주이양 나까디 군주셰베 값수 군중그 나바셰베 값수 아니 마르바 메제베 진상 가르레서 값디 주는 것을 마셰베 진상 유엔데 미시시비 주야 마셰시바니 유니 펜마 차베지 테마타기 레자인 마르바 마셰바 테마 마르바데 아니 가서래 마르비가 판제 대다기 뭐지 주마인 봐 시반되기 좀래 대다가 뭐지 주인 봐 테마타베 레자이 그 마르바데 티 테마타베 주마인 배 마셔봐 임비셔랬어 다시 봐대 양세 치미 주셔버 굉장히 요래서나 최랑대 양세 치마그 유용고시 편바체비 편제그 주의비 체장 아니 대마다버 주바체비 주제지 주니가레스 편주니가세 편주니스 체비 편제 마이나 편제단 주제니스 체비 편제 마이나야 지리 아니 란데 비도 편제 인바 인장 유용고시 편바체비 편제그 주의비 체장 대마다비 주제 주의비 아니 대다체비 치르서 어디 자와 남제 자와 그 미시시비 중에 마지스바 진유 유니 편바체비 대마다지 내자 인세데 다디 순고인 바래.
Now then, the opponent might say, if you assert that craving alone is the cause of samsara, then you contradict the explanation that the cause of suffering is threefold: ignorance, craving, and karma. So in the factors of dependent origination, those three, ignorance, craving, and karma, are explained as being the cause, origination, source of suffering. And then the reply to that is nescience, simple not knowing something, and ignorance. Ignorance here is can be a more active mental defect, mental affliction, are also a cause generating subsequent samsaric existences. The reason they are not explicitly expressed as the cause in this case or in this particular context here, in the context of this discussion of the origination of suffering, is because they are not the immediate cause of a subsequent samsaric existence. Thus, ignorance is not expressed as the cause here. The reason craving is explained as the cause of a subsequent samsaric existence is because it incites the continuum of a subsequent samsaric existence. That is, it functions as the thing that is the active agent impelling the origination of a new subsequent samsaric existence as its own kind of direct result. And it is the projecting cause that projects the subsequent samsaric existence. And because it is the efficient cause that affects the immediate result, that is, so it's the direct, immediate agent that induces the arising of the new existence within samsara. Nor is karma the principal cause of a subsequent existence, because if there is craving, then there is automatically is karma. No,
oh yeah,
we haven't done that yet. Yeah.
that did not yellow junior can answer to give lead. You are to check lead. Lead, any Yasichima could do young, Yasichima could use all Maris, lead and Yasichima could use all Maris. That lead there, and the Gigi Sibayuna, any lead, hungry years, hungry Sibayuna, any lady to Bunamiji to Woodiaba. Sibati Sardana. Ani lay de la, and so the Gisiba Mena, lay your young, and Yasishima Jawa Meba. You are maybe kitty. Siba Mena lay to begin, any lay de Dochi Mizuba, lay to be Jessic and Dovi Shadows. You know, Penjiki lay de any castle, almost any castle, Yasishima to use all Maris.
Well, then karma as well, karma, like ignorance, is not the principal direct cause of a subsequent samsaric existence, because if there is craving, then there is automatically karma, while if there is no craving, then even if there is that karma, there will be no birth into a subsequent samsaric existence. So this is showing that whereas craving is the active agent that directly causes the arising of a new samsaric existence, karma on itself, without craving as an activating kind of projecting factor, then it isn't able to function as the direct cause of the arising of a new samsaric existence. So even if there is that karma, there will be no birth into a subsequent samsaric existence, because even if there is no craving, even a royal existence, which one is earned by karma, that is, one could have the karma to obtain dominion over an entire kingdom. But if the craving isn't there to activate it, then that karma that would project develop into that existence, then there's no way for that to arise.
我印象18年那来月讲，俺来进那没去这步，俺没办法。14年那么高的来线偏女马云的，天气7、8、37了，是吧？18了，14年那么高个，俺这准备住了样，俺来月讲。是吧？我到27万主办7倍来越讲来几这部那么几就听吧没些把的看着的是呢。아니, 현지시 개념을 세바 인상 안티스거든.
So then the craving again, if that doesn't exist, then even if the karma does exist, then there's no way for one to be born into a samsaric existence. And so it's the craving which is the active factor which actualizes the new existence within taking rebirth within samsara, because even if one has craving, or rather, if one doesn't have craving, even if one has the karma to be reborn as like the god Indra and have that kind of dominion over that entire world, there's no way that one would take that rebirth propelled by karma, because the craving for that which would activate that karma is no longer there.
Oh yeah. 아니 다 대마 통라 편바 매에 다 준비되나 대마 무슨 토베 가사 그들아 편제를 내 매봐 송해 너 봐당 편제를 내서도 서봐 매장 편제를 내 요소에 다 이제지 송게 좀 매잡아 편제를 내서 서봐 주 거기에나 대마 통비 가사 그들아 편제를 내 매봐체 당가를 대마 나를 사베 편제를 내 요나 사서 먹으나 아니 다 좀 받아 밥을 줄라 편제길래 여봐.
편제길래
다좀봐다 밥이 줄라 편제길래 여봐 내가 편제길래라 싸도 소바 이 먹고 왔지. 편제길래라 싸도 소바 이 연거나 아니 다좀봐다 밥이 줄라 편제길래 여 말이.
So there's a discussion here about how it is that the karma, which is the projecting factor, whether or not it could exist within the continuum, the mental stream of an arhat who is in their last life, let's say, and they've eliminated all of the causes for being born within samsara. So do they produce within that life a karma which would the karma that projects one into the next life? And it's clear that they don't, because they couldn't, otherwise they would be impelled to take rebirth within samsara. But other aryas, that is those who've achieved the path of seeing, they've seen reality. So at the lower levels of the path, when they've become an arya but they haven't achieved arhatship yet, they nevertheless can develop that, have that karma which projects them to be reborn within samsaric existence at that stage.
Oh yeah, that's
Stop there for today.